Welcome to Remedical, a podcast where we discuss all things medical, from exciting new advances to the infallibility of Grey's Anatomy. I am your host, Amelia Troyer, along with my co-host, Kamal Joshi.
On today's segment, which will also be our last, Amelia, let's postulate the contradicting controversies of medical ethics and Dr. Gregory House's irrational rationality.
Great idea, Kamal. Let's start with Dr. Gregory House. You may have heard about him from the popular TV show House MD. For our viewers who have not, House MD follows around the leading diagnostician and substance abuser at Princeton Plainsboro Teaching Hospital as he and his team work to diagnose and develop treatments for difficult cases.
In Season 1, Episode 9, DNR, House is seen to violate a DNR in order to save the life of his favorite jazz musician. The title of this podcast, involving his irrational rationality, goes to show the complexity of trending medical ethic controversies, such as the statement of DNRs. First, let's talk House. Amelia?
Thanks, Kamal. If you look on our website, you can see the exact episode we reference. Foreman and House are on opposite sides of the spectrum in their views. Foreman represents the side of reason and lawful sides of medicine, while House explains the issue in a cognitive aspect that's more so personal. Before we begin to discuss our opinions on DNRs, let's brush up on exactly what they are. Shall we, Kamal?
Absolutely, Amelia. Do not resuscitate orders, or DNRs, are given to patients to withdraw permission from their physicians to give CPR to them if they experience a sudden cardiac or respiratory arrest. If the patient cannot make a decision on their own, or if they are physically incapable to understand the situation, the physician utilizes advanced care plans or surrogate decision makers, typically family members or close friends. This practice evolved from numerous complaints about the physical injuries typically caused by CPR administration, such as rib cage damage and internal bruising. This allows a more natural death for patients, with the understanding that CPR does not guarantee a saved life, but is actually a last-ditch effort to save a patient.
Well, with the controversiality of DNRs is promoted by the family members' reactions to the patient's decision. While modern hospitals now provide ethical consultations, if necessary, most family members disagree with the patient's decision to sign a DNR order or do not understand the situation due to lack of transparency from the physician.
Yeah, and the biggest dilemma involved, I would say, is between the consequences of the physician's actions and their moral obligations or deontological theories. These theories regard the actions as independent to their consequences, unlike the former. To come to a conclusion for controversial issues, physicians use aspects of justice, non-maleficence, autonomy, and beneficence.
Apart from these general rules of thumb, each DNR decision is unique in its own way, as are the responsible patients. Patients may possess highly variable reasons for their choice to sign a DNR order, whether it be religion, physical capabilities, or other personal beliefs. It is policy that doctors and medical staff respect the patient's decision, as their course of treatment is entirely up to them, regardless of their own opinions. However, some doctors may feel uncomfortable sitting back while the patient undergoes cardiac or respiratory arrest. Though they have spent decades training for similar situations, they must render themselves helpless and respect the patient's decision, even if they overcome themselves with guilt from doing so.
That is such an incredibly stressful situation, Amelia. I can honestly not imagine sitting back and essentially letting a patient die, to put it in layman's terms, instead of trying hard to save their life as a physician.
Yes, Kamal, this would take a huge toll on me as well. However, I think we both understand the importance of effectively communicating all possible treatment plans with the patient every step of the way, but ultimately respecting their monumental decision in the end.
Absolutely. Well, now that we've kind of recapped some of our research on DNRs, let's move back to House and understand this case together. So, in this episode, the patient chooses to sign a DNR order due to his lack of confidence in surviving ALS and ultimate desire to not live without music. Rather than listening to Foreman and accepting the order, House chooses to intubate the patient after he experienced respiratory arrest. Eventually, by saving his life, they're able to devise treatment for him that will alleviate his symptoms and reject their initial prognosis of ALS. What would you have done in this situation, Amelia?
That's a great question, Kamal. I say this because I do not have a definite answer for it, but honestly, I feel like House did a good thing in the end, Like, there was a positive result to all of this, so in this case, I want to say the ends justify the means. What about you, Kamal?
I somewhat agree with you. I think that though his end result was kind of perfect, it's highly over-exaggerated and kind of unlikely to occur in real life. I think the physicians could have easily observed the patient's depression and concluded that he was kind of unfit to sign the order due to his mental state. To combat this, they should have assigned him to like a mental health professional or something, and after a few sessions, then deem him capable of making a proper decision regarding a DNR.
I like that idea. The extra hassle surrounding House's trial and restraining order and everything seemed way too intense for a physician to handle, along with their other cases. House should have been more concerned about aiding the patient in the present through suitable professionals, but then again, he is House, and House does what he wants, regardless of the immediate consequences.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, what are your thoughts on DNRs, Amelia?
Truthfully, I think DNRs, they have a complex story to them. On one hand, you could have terminal illness. There's most people with cancer. There's people that don't want to live for specific reasons that aren't specific to like depression or anxiety or something. It could be they physically can't handle it anymore, so they want to, just go, die happily. I knew this one guy, and he was like, I'm going to have a final meal with my family. And I was like, oh my gosh, how are you doing that, right? And I was like, what do you mean final meal? And he had his final meal, and then he had not a DNR, but a physician-assisted suicide in which he felt necessary to take the next step because he was, ready to, end his life on a good note with his terminal illness. So I think in House's case, what he did wasn't necessarily right in the patient's, perspective, but in the end, it all worked out. So I think it was rightful.
Yeah, I really do understand your opinion and perspective on this whole situation. I feel like throughout this entire series, House MD, Dr. House is always painted in like a really bad light. And him choosing to forego like the DNR order and everything, it kind of puts a negative connotation to DNRs in general. And it's almost seen as a sort of like a taboo, but I feel like it's really good that we talk about things like this so that other people will realize that like patients don't choose to do DNRs just for their depression and everything, like what you said. It's for their own personal reasons. And even though doctors are like trained for decades and centuries at this point to treat patients and keep them essentially alive, DNRs kind of go against what they trained for, and they need to be prepared to follow the healthcare policies and things set in place by the system. That way they essentially just make the patient happy with their decision and ensure that they're fully informed about the consequences of their actions.
Yeah, I think in all this controversy, DNRs are really important, especially to patient care. I know doctors have to respect that decision, but maybe personally, at least for me, it'd be very hard to sit back and watch.
Yeah, I can really see that situation unfolding. I believe that this kind of concluded this discussion very nicely. So now let's kind of transition to another topic, less known at the moment, but more meaningful in this age of scientific innovation, Henrietta Lacks's case. Take it away, Amelia.
Thanks, Kamal. HeLa cells are a strain of immortal cervical cancer cells utilized for advancing scientific research and innovation. However, these cells were obtained without the knowledge and consent of Henrietta Lacks, a black woman from the mid-1900s. Additionally, due to her race and socioeconomic status, she was not rewarded for her contributions to science and died due to her aggressive cervical cancer. Back then, the scientists and researchers who knowingly exploited her social vulnerability and illness were given the credit and financial benefits rather than her or her family. In this case, scientific innovation was prioritized over human morals.
After the researchers discovered the immortality of Henrietta's cancer cells, she continued to receive radium treatment and X-ray therapy at Johns Hopkins Hospital. However, both her and her family did not know about the research conducted on her cellular samples, nor the scientific advancements it would help establish in the future. Though Henrietta eventually told her family about her cervical cancer, they were unable to understand her treatment process. It can be deduced that the researchers and doctors began to take advantage of the entire situation and the lax's socioeconomic status to excuse their lack of communication with the family. Eventually, as a particularly aggressive form of cervical cancer, Henrietta's tumors began spreading to her other internal organs, with terminal uremia finally leading to her death in 1951. It's really cool that the scientists were able to discover this in like a really short period of time, and it has like amazing long-term benefits for the future of scientific achievement and advancement. Yeah. But I feel like this can also prompt a debate between scientific progress versus human rights.
Definitely.
Especially through like the Gila and Henrietta Lacks' case. While I completely support scientific progress and advancement, and I'm sure you do too, as like future medical professionals of some sort, I really feel that it shouldn't precede human rights and it shouldn't overpower that.
Yeah.
In this case, the end shouldn't justify the means. So.
Yeah, I mean, we got the HeLa cells. They help with, they're stem cells. So they can help with the improvement of, other illnesses. You have cancer, terminal illnesses, other things that people are suffering for, that it's like people are like, oh, it's one person who helped the progression of the rest of the entirety of the world and all these discoveries and stuff. But then it's like you have this one person whose life was taken from her because medical professionals didn't tell her what they were doing.
Yeah.
And her family too, was severely impacted. That's why, there was a book made, there was a movie made, just to tell the entire world what happened. And I think though her family was kind of compensated, that doesn't really make up for, losing somebody. Like in the pandemic, you could be compensated for losing somebody, but you're gonna lose that person and you're not gonna get that person back.
Yeah, like life insurance and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I feel like the researchers kind of had the goal of like sacrificing one for the good of everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, granted, they didn't even know that they were immortal cells, right?
Yeah,
like, it could have been normal cells and they could have just killed a normal person.
Exactly.
Just to experiment, but,
but I
best
feel
case scenario.
I felt like once they finally started realizing, like, the importance of her cells, they still continued to experiment in private. And they kept on cloning and selling her cells, like, on the black market and everything. Without telling her exactly what was happening. Like, she didn't even understand, like, what was happening with her illness. Like, that's a whole different situation with her actual cancer.
Yep.
But them taking her cells away from her, even though it was, like, kind of commonplace at the time, and using that for their own pecuniary and like monetary benefits when she was living in like severe poverty and had a very impoverished family and everything. I feel like that was extremely like unjust.
I mean, it's extremely unjust considering they like stuck radium tubes up her to try to cure her cancer and stuff.
Well, that was like the accepted treatment at the time though.
Yeah, but still it's a little like, why are these people doing it? And then you kind of question, like, did black people get the same treatment as the white people at this hospital, right? Why were they only taking cervical cells from black people and then white people could, get all their information? They had patient records. They weren't, as treated as badly as these people were,
I feel like it really just kind of relates to the overall issue of, like, the discrepancies in the system between races. Like, from the beginning and from the get-go, black people are always at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
And because of that, they become, there's more of them below the poverty line.
Yep.
There's more of them who have a lack of education, lower socioeconomic status, compared to white people who are granted these opportunities in the beginning.
Yeah.
Especially, like, with education, having, like, a somewhat stable scientific and biological background
Mm-hmm.
can be really beneficial when in the future you're going to be faced with medical issues and problems.
Yeah.
And you're going to have like patient charts that you have to kind of decide which treatment's best for you.
Yep.
So Henrietta not exactly receiving the education that she could have obtained due to her race and her socioeconomic status
Yeah.
just kind of prevented her from understanding this whole situation, the severity of it.
Mm-hmm.
And like even now most of her ancestors still did not exactly understand it. Like her
Yeah.
daughters and her husband did not
It took them
had no
years
idea
to
what was
find out,
happening.
especially from, the person writing the book. She kind of had to walk Henrietta's family through what happened. The family couldn't really discover it on their own because, once again, they were at a disadvantage. They didn't have all the opportunities to look this stuff up, figure out, why this happened or what happened to their mom. Like, they didn't find out years later that her cervical cells were taken out of her body.
Yeah. And they were just experimenting on the side and making so much money while they were still, like, living pretty badly for their time.
Zero compensation.
Exactly. Even though they ended up compensating in the future, it's kind of like what you said. It cost a life, and to a lot of other people, it might just seem like one life, but like to their family, probably like meant a lot to them because they spoke really highly of her in the book. I believe it was The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot or something.
Yeah, and she was like the foundation of their family, right? Most people's moms are the foundation of their family, so it's like losing your mom's kind of an important thing, right?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we kind of sidetracked from the initial point of this conversation, but on the topic of scientific progress that kind of forgoes human rights, Amelia, can you elaborate on what the researchers ended up accomplishing with the HeLa cells?
Of course. The HeLa cells consisted of helping to kickstart the basic research for the polio vaccine, identifying the detrimental effects of X-rays on cells, establishing clonal growth of cancer cells, being some of the first cells to go to space, and studying the effects of space travel on mankind, developing single-cell imaging to view cellular processes, discovering the effects of viruses produce on cancer growth, and...
I think we get the point, Amelia. For years, Henrietta was never credited for her contributions to science, and her family did not even know of their ancestors' aid to modern medicine. However, this story does have a somewhat bittersweet ending, I guess. After learning of Henrietta Lacks' history, the National Institute of Health came to an agreement in 2013 with her descendants to allow future scientific research with DNA in her cells while preserving the family's privacy.
Yeah, actually, you know what I also just found out? So the university, there's some university in the UK, and they just put up a statue this past October, which was crazy because we were reading about this book and we were like, oh my gosh, that's insane. And then we were looking online and they dedicated a statue in her honor to not only, bring recognition to Henrietta, but like women of color. And, it's super powerful. Yeah. And her family was there and it was, super celebratory. But that's great news, Kamal. This is just one step in the right direction towards a society where we, as hopeful future medical professionals, believe values scientific progress and achievement as well as human rights and morals.
I completely agree, Amelia. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is kind of why we chose this topic of bioethics for our capstone project, to raise awareness on the controversial topics to the world and get all of us questioning not only the system, but ourselves as human beings, kind of like our inner morals and our beliefs, and compare that to the beliefs of the system and what we're kind of forced to conform to with society.
Yeah, I mean, we have TV shows like House, we have movies with DNRs and physician-assisted suicide, we have books like Henrietta Lacks that all kind of teach us, ethically and morally, where do physicians stand? How do doctors deal with this stuff? And how are people treated differently? It's a very deep conversation, but it's an important one considering, the rise and effect of physician-assisted suicide and whether they should be legalized or
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even with COVID and this pandemic and everything, there's just been a rise in physician-assisted suicide, DNRs and everything. Because a lot of people are just finding it really difficult to communicate effectively with their physicians. It's been something that's been difficult to do in the past, but with this recent interest in healthcare and biology in general, people are finding it really difficult to engage with them and have proper, meaningful conversations. So I feel like it's really important that we understand exactly what some of these topics are.
Mm-hmm.
That way we're able to create our own questions with our own physicians, talk to them, figure out why they choose to do this specific treatment compared to that, and just kind of
learn more about the subject and inform others that are, we're going into a new chapter of our lives. We need to stay informed of, what's happening in the medical field if that's what we're studying. So.
Exactly. And, disagree with our deep-rooted beliefs in our system.
Yeah.
And be ready and be able to go beyond what the society and system believes. Yeah.
Learn.
Adapt to our circumstances.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well... Thank you, everyone, for staying with us until the end for a lovely discussion. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment any topics you guys would like us to discuss. Signing off with this information we bestow, we are Joshi and Troyer Co.